Part 2 of Chapter 10 is going to focus on whether different people help because of their personality or because of their values. I'll just apologize right now because I clearly have either a cold or my cat allergy is kicking in. I have a cat at home, even though I'm allergic to cats. So sorry if I sneeze again. Okay, so part 2 of Chapter 10 is going to focus on the question of, do different kinds of people help more or less? So that will be based on their personality or their values. So let's start with personality. Is there such a thing as what we would call pro-social personality, which means people who are more likely to help in any situation compared to other people? So one of the ways that we can test this is by looking at a popular personality theory called the Big Five, or sometimes this is called the Ocean personality theory, because it says that there are 5 major personality traits for any human, and that the 5 traits spell the word ocean if you take the first letter of each trait. So these are described for you on page 313 of your book if you want to check out your book. And they also describe their study that we'll be talking about. So the Big Five suggests that there are 5 major personality traits. Openness to experience is more or less kind of your sense of adventure. Do you like to try new things? Do you like to travel? Conscientiousness is how responsible and detail-oriented you are. Extroversion is how gregarious you are. How much do you like to be around other people? Do you feel comfortable talking to strangers? Agreeableness is how cooperative you are, how much of a people pleaser you are. And neuroticism is how anxious and stressed out you are. So out of those 5 traits, you can probably guess which one is going to be most commonly associated with helping other people. So I assume that you can kind of come up with that hypothesis in your head. Let's talk about a study that tested whether one of those traits is tied to helping more than the other traits. So this was a study done pretty recently by a woman named Mira Hibashi. I actually know Mira. She was a graduate student with me at Purdue University, so she's a personal friend of mine. So Mira did this when she was at Purdue University, and she had participants who were students at Purdue come into a study. She lied to them about what the study was, which is another common thing that we like to do in social psychology, right? So she told them that the study was about listening to a radio program and rating how engaging this radio program was. It was a program theoretically being put together by other Purdue University students. So the radio program interviewed a woman named Katie, and it was about Katie's life story. So Katie talked about how she had these tragic circumstances of her parents being killed in a car accident recently. One of her younger siblings was also in the car. So Katie was left in a situation where she had no money or support to pay for her college tuition or room and board, and she also had to now be in charge of taking care of her younger siblings. So Katie talks about this very sad story, and then the students are asked, tell us, what do you think about the radio program that was just produced? So after they're told the study is done, but really it's not, they're asked, oh, by the way, are you interested in helping Katie? And this is the true dependent variable. So they're asked, would you be willing to help volunteer to raise money for Katie? Would you be willing to kind of canvass the neighborhood and ask other people to help? Would you be willing to just donate money to Katie yourself? And they also asked people, how personally distressed did you feel while you were listening to Katie's story? And what they found is shown in the table here. It's also shown on page 313 of your book. And as you might have expected, the only personality trait that tied to people's willingness to help Katie was agreeableness. So you can see here in the column labeled agreeableness that when participants were given the Big Five personality scale, scores on agreeableness were positively correlated to willingness to help Katie, and none of the other traits were tied to that. So a conclusion from this study is that people who are high in agreeableness are more likely to help strangers. You can see that there's one other correlation that was positively significant in this table, and that's that neurotic people were more likely to feel personal distress when they heard Katie's story, so it stressed them out, but it didn't lead to them actually helping Katie. So more or less, if you're high in agreeableness, if you are a people pleaser, if you're cooperative, you're more likely to help strangers. The last thing that we'll talk about in chapter 10 is the most famous social psychology study that was done to help regarding helping other people. And this was done by Darley and Batson way back in 1973, so 20 years ago. And they were interested in whether people who profess to have Christian values were more likely to help other people. So the idea was, let's get participants who say that they're very high in Christian values. And the participants who were chosen for this study were students who were actually studying to be ministers at the Princeton Theological Seminary. So theoretically, this group of people should already be a group of people who intrinsically like helping other people. Maybe that's why they want to be ministers. So they had all of their participants were from that sample. And independent variable here, there were actually two independent variables. So the first one was the future ministers were all asked to write an essay. Half of them were asked to write an essay about the story of the Good Samaritan from the Bible, which, if you're not familiar with it, is about helping a stranger. So half of them write a story, which is basically priming them or reminding them of their values of helping other people because it's from the Bible. Half of them are asked to write an essay about their future career as a minister. So basically, just tell me about the types of duties that you'll have as a minister. The second independent variable came in part 2 of this study. Sorry, my allergies are kicking in. So the second part of the study said, okay, we need you to actually go to a different building on campus for part 2 of the study. And then the independent variable was whether they were told to hurry or not. So 1/3 of the participants were told, just walk over to this other building. It's 2 buildings away. There's no rush. Take your time. 1/3 of the participants were told, you have to walk to this building. It's 2 buildings away. They're expecting you, so why don't you go ahead and leave now? So sort of a small rush condition. And then 1/3 of the participants were told, you have to run to this other part of the building. They're basically expecting you, and you're already late. And if you don't get there immediately, you're going to mess up this entire study. So go right now. So independent variable number 1 is, what essay do you write? Independent variable number 2 is, do you think you're in a hurry or not? And there were 3 levels of that independent variable. So here's where the dependent variable comes in. On their way between building 1 and building 2, each participant, they were done one at a time, by the way, so they're on their own. They're running or walking to the next building, and they see a man who's slumped over and groaning. By the way, this is the exact same situation as in the story of the Good Samaritan. So they see this man who clearly needs help, and the question is, excuse me, do they stop and help this man? So that's the dependent variable. Okay, so here are the results. So overall, the amount of helping was only 40%. So across all the conditions, only about half of the participants stopped to help the man. Did the independent variables matter? It turned out that, as you can see from this graph, people who were in the high rush condition, that's this condition here, high rush, they were the least likely to help, which makes sense because they were in a hurry, right? I don't have time to help this man. People who were not in a rush were the most likely to help. But what also mattered was the independent variable only in one of these other conditions. So what I mean by that is the essay that you wrote didn't matter. If you were in a hurry, it didn't matter if you had just written an essay about helping people. You still didn't help. That's the blue bars here. The people who wrote that essay about the Good Samaritan, they were a little bit more likely to help in all 3 of the conditions, but in these 2 conditions, it wasn't significant. The essay only mattered when people were not in a hurry. So what they concluded from the study was, people who think of themselves as a good person, people who are reminded of their values as helpers, that helps sometimes if there's not some other excuse to not help. If you give people a situation where I kind of have an excuse to not help because it's going to hurt me, then my values kind of go out the window. So their point here is that there might be people who think of themselves as good people and still don't help because it doesn't really benefit them. So this goes back to our question from mini lecture number 1. When do we help? Do we help when it's going to mean that we have to have a sacrifice and that would hurt us? Or is there such a thing as helping because it really is just out of the goodness of our hearts? So these are some interesting questions to think about. Next time you help someone, I hope that you remember these ideas and take the time to help them, even if it means that you're a little bit inconvenienced. Thanks very much, and good luck on this chapter quiz.